Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Akwina Salma Melina, and I'm the leader of Group 6. And here we will present the result of our group discussion about reception theory. But first, I will introduce the member of Group 6. There are Husna Cahaya Nurani, Vena Katrinada, Rizka Sakinatun Anissa, and the last is Baby Yulieta Widyasko. Okay, reception theory originated from the works of Hans Robert Joost in the late 60s, and the most influential work was produced during the 60s and early 80s in Germany and the United States. He mentioned reader-response theory in his work entitled Literary History as a Challenge to Literary Theory. Literary reception can briefly be referred to as a stream that examines literary texts, starting with the reader who reacts or responds to the text. The reader as giving meaning is a variable according to space, time, and socio-cultural group. It means that literary works are not the same as reading, understanding, and judging throughout period or in all certain groups. Reception theory of literature is far from beginning the first to have systematic and dispersed view into a new theoretical basis to account for variation in interpretation in a reasonable way. According to the formulation of the theory, this is in giving a welcome to a literary work, readers are directed by horizon hope. This horizon hope is an active interaction between literary works and readers, the system or horizon of literary works on the one hand, and the interpretation system in the audience community on the other. Okay, next will be continued by Husna Cahaya.
Hello, my name is Husna Cahaya, and I will continue the presentation. Reception theory is a version of reader-response literary theory that emphasizes each particular reader's reception or interpretation in making meaning from a literary text. Reception theory is generally referred to as audience reception in the analysis of communication models. Next. The theory of reader-response literature is often also known as the theory of literary reception. This theory focuses on the relationship between literary texts and readers. This theory is also the conceptual basis for literary criticism or literary research that specifically wants to see the relationship between readers and literary texts. Based on this theory is reader-response criticism. This criticism states that the meaning of a literary work is an interpretation created or constructed or produced by reader and writer as a collective subject. Next. Joost's literary reception theory approach emphasizes the acceptance aspect, in this case, how a creative writer accepts his previous work, which allow him to create something new from it, or how a non-creative writer accepts a work so that the work has a certain meaning for him. The next. Reader-response theory and reception theory have similarity and also a lot of uniqueness. The first, reader-response theory concerned with single reader, but reception theory, entire readership, it takes into account. The second, Reader response theory takes into account particular point. Unlike reader response theory, reception theory takes into account reception aesthetic and reception history. Next is Vena.
I will continue the presentation from Husna. Reception aesthetic. This theory of the aesthetic of reception insists not only on the development of the work's form and meaning through historical understanding, but also on the insertion of the individual work into a literary series. We must undertake not only a diachronic analysis of the responses to the text over time, but also a series of synchronic perspectives that reveal the text's relationship with other text genre and overarching norms at a given time. Next. Reception history. According to Harold Marcus, reception history is the history of the meanings that have been inputted to historical events. It tracks the different ways in which participants, observers, historians, and other retrospective interpreters have attempted to make sense of events both as they unfolded and over time since then to make those events meaningful for the present in which they lived and live. Next. Literary history is a process of aesthetic reception and production that takes place in the realization of literary text as part of the reader's receptiveness, the reflection of critics and authors in the continuity of their creativity. Next. Reception theory also uses mass communication. The important proponent of this theory is Todd Hall in 1973. Encoding and decoding television discourse is considered about breaking essay in this field. And the next is Rizka Sakinatun.
Okay, hello, my name is Rizka and I will continue the presentation. So his approach, called the encoding and decoding model of communications, are a form of textual analysis that focus on the scope of negotiation and opposition by the audience. Means that a text, such as book, movie, or other creative work, is not simply passively accepted by the audience, but the reader interprets the meaning of the text based on their individual cultural background and life experiences. House theory, encoding and decoding focus on the communication processes at play in text that are in televisual form. Okay, next. The metaphor for consuming content is not just theory. It is also used for convenience. It has unintended consequences when discussing media, as the way we talk about things shapes our understanding and the way we think about how it works. Cultural theorist Stuart Hall points to a reality that exists outside of language, but continues to be mediated. What we can say and now must be produced through discourse. An extension of the consumption metaphor is that media are digested and ultimately affect us in several ways. Okay, next. Seeing media as a consumable is that as an audience, it only brings out what is creator put in it. Viewer are passively recipients of the consuming work, and their understanding depends on how explicit the creator is. The failure of the producer is if the meaning he imparts is not understood, and this has a major impact on the production process because the meaning must be clearly conveyed and summarized to the audience in the text in order to be seen as a successful part of this model. Okay, next. Stuart Hall is frustrating because media is seen as a predetermined package of meaning. The suggestion of the encoding and decoding space is that they are much more complicated and that creating and understanding meaning in a medium is a complex process at each stage. Hall states that when media are created, they are encoded in a complex system of meaning making, which is informed by things such as the ideologies of those who produce them. And next will be continued by Debbie.
Hello, my name is Debbie Uliata Widyasko, and I will continue the presentation. Meanings are coded intentionally by producers or can only be the result of people who have unconsciously placed meaning in the work. Hall also points out that the process of using media is called decoding, and that is where we get the meaning of the work. But Hall also states that encoding and decoding may not be perfect, and he suggests that audiences should not take the work's intended meaning. According to Hall, there are three ways that audiences can solve meaning in a text. First, dominant is where the audience fully accepts the meaning encoded into the snippet. Second, negotiated. The audience agrees with some preferred meaning and is willing to take what they want and discard what they don't want. Third, in opposition. The audience decides to reject or come up with their interpretation, which is not included by the producer at all. Example, first, dominant. For example, watching a political speech and agreeing with it. Second, negotiated. For example, neither agreeing or disagreeing with the political speech or being disinterested. And last, oppositional. For example, total rejection of the political speech and active opposition. This has benefits because the audience is at the core of the meaning-making process, unlike the consumption model, which allows that audience to have conflicting views of work. In addition, the model also frees producers from the tyranny of understanding. That's all from our group. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.